Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is cyber threats and solutions in the supply chain with my friend Joe Ohr. How's it going, Joe?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Doing great. We've had so many technical issues. Hopefully we're past all those today. Joe, please introduce yourself and your company, where you're calling from today.
Hi, I'm Joe Ohr. I work at the NMFTA, and I'm calling in from right outside of Dallas, Texas.
Very nice. Now, what does NMFTA stand for and what do they do?
Yeah, NMFTA stands for National Motor Freight Truck Association. And what we do is what our mission statement is to promote, advance, and improve the welfare and interests of the motor carrier industry. So we do this through research, education, lobbying, and developing industry standards and best practices. So, really, what our goal is to have the most informed membership to not only grow profitability, but also efficiently run operations and protect against new challenges resulting from the digital era, including cybersecurity, which we really want to talk about today.
Yep. And you guys are also the standard setting organization for the less than truckload. So anyone who's part of less than truckload deals with the classifications and that business. And I know you guys, I just had you guys on a month or so ago talking about the reclassifications that you guys are doing, or I shouldn't say the new classifications that you're going to have in 2025, which is going to make LTL even better than it is today.
Yeah, so that's a big effort that we're going through. We spent a lot of time over the years doing what's called classification reimagination. And we've been talking to 3PLs or brokers, carriers and shippers, trying to figure out how to simplify classification. We want to make that even easier. And so we want to simplify that so that it reduces the friction between the shippers, the carriers, and the brokers. And in order to do that, you simplify it. And so we're going through the effort of that simplification. So one of the things that we're focused on is docket 2025-1, and that will come out in the August timeframe. And we're also releasing a new version of what's now called Class IT that will support that new docket. And so we're really excited about that, as it will really make classification easier for everybody within the trucking industry that takes advantage of classification.
Yep. And I know you guys have a conference coming up in October where it's about cybersecurity. It's in Ohio. We'll get to that in more detail, but you guys don't do just less than truckload. That is, you guys are the standard setting for them, but you guys are involved in all of the, again, National Motor Freight Trucking Association. So it's everything.
Yeah, it really is. With a standard setting organization, obviously with classification, a lot of that is LTL. But when you think of cybersecurity, and then also another thing we're focused on is digitalization, where digitalization standards are really important. So if you think about freight visibility, if you think about bill of lading, that's not specific to LTL. So we're starting to branch into other areas with that and with those standards, because what we're finding is just trucking itself, when you read the headlines, you read about whether it be Knight Swift, Schneider, a lot of people are getting involved. They're not just in truckload. They're getting involved in LTL. They're getting involved in truckload. As they diversify, it's important for us to diversify also. And these standards need to diversify. So we're looking at what are the commonalities in as far as digitalization. But then as far as cybersecurity, it's not like the cybersecurity is unique to LTL, which is why we're really focused on cybersecurity across the entire industry. So it's not even just trucking. We're looking at it from a supply chain perspective. So we're looking at it from a much broader lens than even trucking. And so that's why if you look at our agenda for Cleveland, it includes some folks from outside of the LTL industry.
Yeah, Joe, we were talking yesterday about this, and I've said this previously on my podcast, but I think it's everyone notices. In, I don't know, a month ago, we had that big outage because of CrowdStrike. Now, CrowdStrike wasn't hackers; it was just, but it did display a vulnerability that impacted our airlines and Microsoft. And then a few weeks before that, we had AT&T was hacked. These are all companies that have invested in cybersecurity and tech, and probably massive investments in cybersecurity and tech. And so if they can be hacked, I guess anybody can be. But the expectation of all the shippers we're working with are, we have to do, if we're moving freight for them, the expectation they have is you're not going to infect me or make me vulnerable to a cybersecurity attack. Please elaborate.
Yeah, I think that the approach used to be that, hey, if let's educate you on how to avoid being hacked. Let's create an environment where you will never be hacked. And I think that's a great goal, but that's also a very unrealistic goal. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about in Cleveland at the conference is, hey, let's talk about how to prevent it, but also let's talk about what happens. So let's talk about business continuity. Let's talk about the when it if it does happen, how long can your business be impacted? And we are so dependent on our technology. So if there is a cyber attack, how does a business continue to run? And so that's everything from freight visibilities to how do you dispatch the trucks to who do you have to reach out to from a legal perspective? How are your contracts written? There's just so much to it. Who do you have to inform? I think, like you said, the when you see the Microsofts, the AT&Ts get impacted, and that's just the ones you hear about. I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. We're past COVID, knock on wood. But during COVID, what we all recognized was some of our supply chain, some of our business was a little more brittle than when we thought. And so we all talked ever since then. We want to build resiliency into our supply chains. And that is going to definitely be part of security. And I've helped large shippers select 3PLs, select logistics partners. And I told you this when we were talking about it before we hit record, that we talked about technology, but we need to get deep dives into cybersecurity. Like, how will you make sure that you won't expose my customer here to any problems? And I think if we were to do it today, Joe, if you and I were helping somebody select a logistics partner, we would talk about cybersecurity as one of the top things.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. I mentioned to you before in a previous role I was at, I can remember we would get an RFP and it never had a cybersecurity section 15 years ago. It wasn't until about 6 or 7 years ago where it had a cybersecurity section. And I can remember last year meeting with some CIOs and CTOs, and we were talking about that. And even last year, they made a comment that so many contracts are signed without security approval, and how they're still wanting to make sure that, hey, they've got a voice. They've got to make sure they're part of that RFP. And not only that, it was like I want to say 8 or 9 years ago, I was at a very large carrier and I was helping set up some server infrastructure and integration. And somebody said, hey, one of the folks that I worked with is, hey, these guys want to talk about cybersecurity in the cab. And that was not a concept that was really around 8, 9, 10 years ago. And I was like, okay. And I sat down and they threw questions at me that we had thought about but never been asked. It was a rough 2 hour meeting. And I just looked at the person I was with thinking, oh man, you set me up on this. And I chuckled. It was probably another 2 years before we had more meetings like that. But now it's common. It is commonplace. And NMFTA's done documentation on that.
Yeah, and we won't mention names, but we discussed before we hit record some top carriers that we know of who had cybersecurity attacks. And I think we'll get into more what is a cybersecurity attack versus what is the cargo theft. I think both are big problems, but I think overall cybersecurity could shut you down for a lot longer than a cargo theft in most cases. We'll get into all of that in a minute. But Joe, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined NMFTA.
Yes, I grew up in Ohio, just south of Columbus, a little town called Circleville. So it's known for pumpkin. So it's got something called the Pumpkin Show. Went to Ohio State. Now,
The Ohio State. I was just going to say, you've said it wrong.
yeah, and graduated from Ohio State and taught both mathematics and history. Relocated to North Carolina. Always was interested in computers and IT. And I guess I'm dating myself, but taught students with learning disabilities. And one of the things that learned was, hey, computers and hands-on is great for these students. So introduced computers into the classroom and built IT labs and things like that, and was asked to do summer classes and ended up really taking what was a hobby and a passion and started taking classes. Got some certifications like CCNA, MCSE, some security certifications. Was offered a summertime job at Eaton Technologies. They were starting a division because this was back in 2000, because something that wasn't called the ELD mandate they thought was going to come out in 2000, around 2000. That turned into a full-time job. And so made the jump out of education into that and thought, I don't know if I want to work in the trucking industry the rest of my life, but I love it. And ended up just falling in love with the industry. And I've always had a passion for IT, cybersecurity. So it's a combination of doing things that I love. And that division got bought out by Qualcomm, relocated to San Diego, spent some time in San Diego, then moved to Dallas, but I was part of Omnitracs. And then I was talking to NMFTA and had an opportunity to work for a nonprofit and really sat down with Debbie Sparks and met with the executive team, including folks like Caroline and Lyle, and just really liked and believed in the mission of NMFTA, the give back with cybersecurity and where they were headed, and just wanted to do this and jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting to me when I interview a lot of people and I look at their LinkedIn profile. It's amazing how many people in the tech side of trucking went through Omnitracs or Qualcomm. They're like the mafia of that. Everybody's, I think in a way, if you go back 20 years ago, all this was very niche. And now freight tech exploded, and those guys are the old timers of the business, but it's the foundation of the business also. All those fleet analytics come out. I guess what they call them, fleet softwares.
Yeah, the fleet telematics. We were doing things, I think we all are proud of that heritage. When you look back on it, I remember at Qualcomm when they did a CDMA launch, one of the first slides said, "Thank you, QWBS." And QWBS was our division. And it actually funded CDMA. So the trucking software telematics is what funded the cell phone division. And so that's pretty neat if you look at that heritage. And they got a museum with the van that used to do the testing of the telematics. And of course, one of the first couple customers, Schneider was one of the first ones. There's a customer up in Canada And so it's pretty amazing what was accomplished back then and with the data centers and the cutovers that we did. It is stuff that still today you look back on it and say, wow, that's pretty amazing that we did that.
Yeah, and it's funny. You kids will have to look it up on the internet. But CB radios, when I was a kid, people had CB radios. My dad did because he was a traveling salesman. And I always remember those CB radios. It seemed like a miracle that you could talk while driving around in a car or truck. It was just, as a kid, we are absolutely fascinated with this possibility. And now my kids be like, how would you drive somewhere without a phone in your car?
Exactly. Yeah. My kids can't my kids both started my daughter started new college, my son started college, and they can't imagine not having navigation on their phone.
Right, right, exactly. So let's switch gears and talk about some of these cyber threats. So what what cyber threats are we seeing in the transportation and logistics space?
The biggest one that we see is and ransomware is when somebody gets into your infrastructure, into your network, and basically they go after you for money. And so these are very organized, and usually these are state sponsored attacks. And these are not a lot of times ads where it's the guy in the basement in a hood. Nah, these are run by nation states, and these are very calculated. And what they do is they send emails with lookalike domains, and these are blast. And they used to be, oh, broken English, you can tell. Now they're like very similar. An I is replaced with a one, or a zero is replaced with an O. So you really got to be good to tell the difference. I know some I've reported to my bank, and the bank can't tell the difference. And so somebody clicks on that or downloads a PDF that activates it. And what they do, they may not take action right away. They'll just get there, they'll sit there and they'll pull information and gather information. And the next thing you know, they've got gigs of data, sometimes terabytes of data that they've got captured from your network. And then they'll leave a note saying, we've got this information. And if you don't pay us X amount of dollars, we're going to expose this information or we're going to shut down your network. And what they do is they look at your revenue. They do the homework and they'll go after a certain percent of your revenue. So if you're a big trucking company, it's 20, let's say it's 20%. If you're a big trucking company and you make $100 million, it's 20%. If you're a small trucking company and you're making $1 million, it's 20%. So they're not looking to make a specific dollar amount. It's all based on percents. So we hear a lot of times from smaller companies is, hey, they're not coming after me. They're only coming after the big guys. But they're really going after everybody. And it's whoever happens to click on that link. And they're just spraying that thing out to anybody who may click on it.
Yeah, Joe, I would think where we're at today, the bigger risk for a smaller company or even whether you're a broker or 3PL carrier, the bigger risk, I think, is the bigger companies that we work with are going to start asking us, are we compliant with whatever we're supposed to be compliant with? And maybe you know about that. I don't. I know there's probably some standards that we should meet, and that is going to prevent you from getting on the RFP.
Yeah, there are. There will be questionnaires that you have to meet. And also from a vendor perspective, there's going to be ISO certifications. There's going to be penetration testing. I know for us, for example, we're looking at some software and I'm asking for penetration testing results, how often you do your pen testing, things like that. So customers, if you look at most of the times that a company has been impacted, it's been through a third party. And I can remember one of the First hacks that I ever heard about was Target, and it's probably been 10 years ago, maybe.
I remember.
Yeah, it was through an AC vendor that hooked up the laptop, if I remember correctly. And so you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you can be as protected as you think you can be. But then if you let a third party in, and then that's a weakness. And that's why one of the things we're also focused on in the conference in Cleveland is API. You really got to be careful who you're letting into that door, because with the APIs, you got to make sure that you're using proper authentication, proper encryption, and that the API that you're passing does require that level of encryption and authentication. You don't want to be passing things in clear text. You want to make sure that they're using proper authentication.
We hear this all the time on my podcast. If you listen, people say we have an API. That's how we connect. Used to take these integrations would take a long time, where you'd say, "Yeah, we're gonna do this integration. We got to pay a guy, and he's going to do it for 10 weeks, and it's very expensive." Now you say, "I can connect with you overnight, Joe. We got an API," and that's good, but it also leads to this risk. And I think the more we rely on this connectivity to our partners, and we made it really easy, we're also making it easy for the bad guys.
Yeah, we are. You still have to do your due diligence. You still have to make sure you again, it's something you have to do an RFP. You got to look at the connectivity. You got to look at the security. You got to look at the data that it's passing. You bring up a great point. Everything that's the things that are the most simple are typically not the most secure. It's just like when you set up a network, you hear the term zero trust. Zero trust is very painful for a lot of people, but it's the right thing to do because it's really locking things down. Then you let things in as it's needed, but it's painful. And that's the model that we choose. And for APIs, it's the same thing. You lock it down, and so things may take longer, but it's the right thing to do to keep it secure. And it's the same thing with APIs. I'd much rather take a couple more days to deploy an API and do it the right way and the secure way. Now, with that being said, the APIs are much better than what they were years ago. So I think the days of it taking 10 weeks to deploy an API are gone, thank goodness. But I think it is tough to deploy APIs in a day. I still think you have to do your due diligence.
Yeah. And by the way, I can speak as a supply chain guy. I worked in automotive for many years, and we have the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers. Then you have the tier one suppliers. The tier one suppliers are massive. They're the Magnas, TRWs, JCI, and those are billion-dollar companies in their own right. And then there's tier twos. A lot of those are still billion-dollar companies. The tier twos support the tier ones. And then you have these tier threes, tier fours. I don't even know if there's tier fives. I suspect there are. The tier 2, 3, 4, 5 can be smaller, and they might be overseas. They might be that partner because they're in a low income or a low cost country. And what's happening now for anyone in a supply chain role is they're being told, you make sure you're not working with anybody who's using slave labor. You make sure you're not using anything from certain countries. I don't think we can buy from Iran, places like that right now. And I think you're going to see some of the same compliance brought over to us. So if you're a broker, you might have to say, hey, we can prove our own security, but we also have to be able to prove the cybersecurity of the people we're working with. It hasn't happened yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing bigger companies that really are digging in on cybersecurity, saying, not only does my broker or my carrier have to be this, but anyone they work with has to meet these standards. Because you said it, Joe, the weakest link, that's all it is. The weakest link is they're in, and as soon as they're in your system, you're in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is, when you work with offshore, I think there is obviously emphasis now on where you offshore. I don't think offshore is going anywhere, but like we do see an additional lens on where you offshore. Or you do where do you near shore? It used to not certain countries in the past you could offshore. Now, not so much because cyber is a concern with offshoring in certain countries.
Yep. Yep. So it is. So we talked about them getting into your system. So we all receive those emails with that looks legit. I told you yesterday when we were talking that I received a payment from somebody, and I looked at it. I was like, "Oh, this is fake," and it wasn't. But it most of the time when I look at those, I get things that say, "Hey, your payment's on its way," or whatever. And I look and I go, "Oh, is that real or is that fake?" And all the PDFs or attachments, whatever they are, I never open them. But imagine all you'd have to have is one person opening that, and that's downloading them onto your server. It's not that hard.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing you can do is training. And you do training where you send those emails, and it's a little, I know people don't like it, but one of the things that a lot of companies do is they'll send those emails, and if you click on it, you you get assigned training. I forget what, I think it was a trucking company or a shipper. They sent something to people, and obviously, as a younger generation, that, hey, you want Taylor Swift tickets. And everybody who clicked on it had to go to cyber training, and the room was packed.
So I want to take a quick time out to invite you to the Trimble Insight Conference, which will be held in Las Vegas on September 15th, 16th, and 17th. I will definitely be there, and you should too. Trimble Transportation is a leading provider of transportation management solutions, offering technology and services to help businesses optimize their fleet operations and improve efficiency. If you're looking for the transportation conference of the year, look no further than Trimble Insight 2024, featuring over 200 educational breakout sessions, networking opportunities, and engaging evening events. I recently interviewed Kelly Williams from Trimble, and I will put a link to that episode along with a link to the conference registration in the show notes. I will see you in Las Vegas. So, Joe, I want to switch gears for a minute. I want to talk about cargo theft, which you told me is the first cousin of cybersecurity. Please elaborate.
Yeah, so we look at cargo theft really as two areas. One of it is tied to cybersecurity, and the other is not. The area that we think is tied to cybersecurity is where technology is used to basically create the theft. So I think there's two examples of that. The first one is through the load boards. So we've all heard of some recent examples where the bad actor has actually created or been able to create ads or look-alike domains for the load boards and been able to get a bid on a load and get the truck to go somewhere and been able to steal that load. So that does two things. Number one, they get the load, and number two, they get paid for the load. And so that is the first thing that we really want to focus on, because again, that's a lookalike domain. And we have actually seen through some of the analysis where people outside in other countries, we saw it a couple months ago in Russia, even before it happened. We saw lookalike domains being registered that mirrored some of the load board sites in the United States. So these are very targeted attacks on the load boards. So they were going to start sending these emails to these carriers saying, "Hey, sign up," or we're looking for loads. And that was to intercept the loads, to get you to pay for a load, to get you to send your financial information. So I think that's one flavor of cargo theft. And so, in order to prevent that, you really have to make sure that you are looking at, you are logging into your actual load board. You are looking at you are hovering over the link, that you are actually logging in, replying to the right email. And the other thing is making sure your drivers are aware. They're looking at their surroundings. The other thing is most carriers, they have asset tracking on their trailers, not only their trucks, but they should have asset tracking on their trailers. And once they have that, make sure that the only people that have access to that are the people that belong to the company that should have. We do a really good job of onboarding our employees. We do a really, in general, poor job of offboarding our employees. And so make sure that when employees leave, whether it be full time or contractors, we offboard them. And that the only people that have access to being able to track and trace these trailers are the people that need that access. And when a person leaves the company, they no longer have that access.
I know we're talking to people in the past about cybersecurity that it's not just you got to get them so they can't get back in your system, but sometimes there's emails that are left out there, and you have to you have to close that email because these crooks are getting very sophisticated about how they get into the systems.
Yeah, they do. Or if it's a standalone system, they may call a provider and say, "Hey, I'm locked out of my account. Can you reset my password?" And that's one of the questions I would ask in an RFP is, what's your password reset policy? Can I do my own password reset? Does it require two-factor authentication? Because you don't want somebody resetting passwords.
Yeah, I remember one of my last projects in automotive, I used to I had to get into their systems, and I remember every week it would reset my password, or I had to, or it would let me in. and and everyone would joke that I have, everyone would joke that I have all of them written down because I'm using them over and over again, or whatever it was. Everyone had some sort of system in mind, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and we all have to do it. So the cargo theft, even though it's more immediate and it's happening, there's some systems, there's some softwares out there that can help you prevent that. I think everyone knows what those are. We talked about on this podcast. Cargo theft is the more immediate and maybe more likely, but cybersecurity is potentially the one that shuts down your business.
Yeah, it is. Cargo theft is definitely something that's a focus, but the bigger focus is the overall cybersecurity. Cybersecurity's the thing that if not taken seriously can shut down the business. That's the one that impacts everything. It's something that's you've got to look at. You got to get HR, you've got to get legal. It's branches out and touches every piece of your business. You need to make sure all those branches of your business are included in it, from contracts to employees, everything.
Yep. So I want to switch gears and talk, excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about the solutions to this. And one of the solutions to this is to get to the NMFTA Cybersecurity Conference, which is down in Cleveland. I wrote it down, October 27th, 28th, and 29th. By the way, I will be there, and I know you will too, Joe. So please tell us a little bit about that conference. First off, what it's about and maybe some of the notables who will be there.
Yeah, so we're super excited about the conference this year. In the past, we really looked at other conferences and we looked at feedback from even our conferences. And the feedback we got was conference was good, but we want to hear from people in our industry. We want to hear from our peers. And so that's the theme this year. We brought in people that walk the walk, talk the talk, live the life, and we've got them as our main speakers. And obviously, we've got some of the folks that that we've heard from in the past that we've helped, we believe add really good things. But we've got kicking off, we've got Warner, who's going to talk about best practices, things that they've done to keep them safe. But then to end it, we've got a roundtable with Estes, War Trucking. We've also got XPO in there. So we really want people to hear from the fleets because at the end of the day, they're the ones that really are the experts. We've got somebody from Larry Coker's office from the White House. We've got somebody from CISA. We're also going to talk, about API security. And then I think one of the things that makes us unique is we're going to talk about asset security also. So we did a white paper on seat key exchange, which is exchange of information to and from the ECU. We're going to do something about a project that we did with Colorado State University called the Ultimate Truck Hacking Platform, which isn't as scary as it sounds, but it's a tool that we developed with the university to really help test. And then we've also got some other roundtables that we're promoting, but it's really, we want to focus on three areas. We want to focus on the asset side. We want to focus on the enterprise side. So, the larger companies, but then we also want to focus on the SMB medium size because not everybody's got a cybersecurity department and not everybody has an IT shop even. And so we understand in some of these companies, we're going to just be the consultant role. And in some of these companies, they want to know how to implement cybersecurity. So we want to do something that applies to all audiences. And so this is really an opportunity for everybody to get together, whether you're CIO, CTO, and just learn. So that's really the audience that we're going for.
Joe, I know you guys are not new to this either. You guys have been involved with cybersecurity for over 10 years. And there's a lot of people who are focused on it in the last year or two for good reason, but you guys are not new to it. And it's probably because of the nature of your business as the people setting the standards. I think you said something earlier about the weakest link. The nature of our business is we are working with a lot of smaller companies. The majority of trucking companies are relatively small, and not all of them are going to have the focus on it. So I think if you're a broker or a 3PL, you can be that guide that says, hey, here's what we'd like you guys to do. This is a best practice for us. And maybe I always say, don't implement it overnight. Say, hey, guys, here's what we'd like over this is what we want in the first month, and this is what we want next month after that. Create a process and get everybody on board so you can go comfortably to the big companies, the Fortune 500, who are going to start demanding that brokers and 3PLs show me that nobody you work with is going to, including you, are going to bring us potential cybersecurity risks.
Yeah. And again, I think everybody's needs are going to be a little bit different. And that's what we want to do. We want to create the standards for these small companies, for the owner operators. I've worked with owner operators for 20 years. And I worked a lot with them, with the ELD mandate. And what I learned, with the ELD mandate, is they didn't know where to start. And they're like, just tell me where to start. How do I implement it? Because they're like, you got to remember, driving the truck is my main priority. This other stuff, it's not my main priority. So I need a blueprint. And so that's what we want to do. We want to create a blueprint for cybersecurity for these SMBs, for these owner operators, so that they can implement it. And it may be somebody that does it part-time. And that's really what we want to do because, again, we are the standard setting organization. So we want to create that standard setting organization for them, which, again, if you're working with a large carrier, honestly, we're not going to set their standards. They're going to set their standards, and we're simply going to advise and help facilitate with them. So our role is going to be different with them.
I think, Joe, you and I both have a lot of operations background. And I think ops guys are always worried about risk, whether it's risk of cost or quality, or in this case, cybersecurity. Always, what can go wrong? What can possibly go wrong? That's how ops people think. I don't ever think I'll get that out of my head. But if you're on the sales side of things, I think you can start to embrace some of this and say, hey, we're going to be a leader in this. We're not going to try and avoid it, because that conversation is going to come up. If it doesn't come up this year, it's coming up next year. And I don't want this to happen, but I still feel like we could have a digital 9/11, an event that gets everybody's attention. And then overnight, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 5,000 are going to demand of this industry a higher standard. And you don't want to go and start the process then. Start now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a scary thing. We've got a podcast coming up. It's the week of the 17th. I believe it's on the 18th, that Thursday, and it's about the Chinese cranes. And if you look at some of the reports on that, and we'll release a white paper, they haven't done anything with that data, but they've been collecting it.
What is that? What is a Chinese crane? I don't even know what that is.
Where there were cranes that were made in China. And what was found is that they were sending a lot of data to the Chinese government, including positions, pictures, location information, but no one knows what's being done with it. And it's been collecting this data for a very long time, but no one knows what the purpose is. And the government actually did a release on it. And so CISA did something saying, hey, this is an issue. And it was strange, even though it was our ports, it really didn't get a lot of traction. And so we picked it up, and we're doing a white paper and a webinar on it the week of the September 16th. And we're going to talk about it because it, for whatever reason, it seemed to be something no one wanted to talk about. And I think it's because it hasn't turned into anything.
Joe, you're absolutely right.
And so it didn't turn into anything, so it hasn't made headlines. But and our tactic is not to scare, but I think this is something that we want to talk about because hey, this is an example where data is being collected, but we don't know what it's for. And it's pictures, it's locations, and it's got to do with our ports. So it could impact supply chain. So I think it's an important topic to talk about.
And this is scary when you think of the potential implications. But this is why my feeling is, you mentioned the ELD mandate. I forgot what year that went in, but we talked about it for a few years beforehand. And I did a lot of webinars on behalf of some companies. And I always remember people going, oh yeah, we got to get that. We got to get an ELD, an approved one, because I think there was not all ELDs, electronic logging devices, were approved. But what kind of shocked me was after the ELD mandate, when there was a whole bunch of companies saying, I didn't hear anything about this. And I was like, what? It's been the chatter of this industry. Am I lying to say that was 2 years of constant discussion and turmoil and complaining, or here's the solution? And then there was people just said, I had no idea.
Yeah, and not to get off subject, but I can remember thinking and trying to build a staff to operationally support the mandate and thinking, okay, everybody's going to start buying on this date, and then over the summer we'll ramp up, and everybody's going to do this the right way. And I can remember thinking, man, that's not what's happening. And then around December 5th, it started to ramp. And then the week of, because it went live, if I remember right, on what, the 18th?
I don't remember now, but
Oh yeah. And I can just remember that last week. It was like, it was crazy.
Joe, that's because you're an ops guy and you think there's a process. We're going to develop a plan and we're going to be ready and ahead of time, and it's going to be bulletproof.
Yeah, it is. Oh man, this is nuts.
And in these companies' defense, a lot of companies right now, it's not the best of times. So they say, we're just focused on growing and staying in business. There's lots of brokers who've gone under in the last year, like a lot of small carriers going under. They aren't worried about this. They might call this nice to have, but I'm going to say it's not going to be nice to have for much longer. It's going to be must have. If you want to work with certain companies, they're going to say the bar is higher. By the way, we all know certain companies. I'll use Walmart as a good example. The bar's a little higher there. If you want to work there, you have to do certain things. We're going to hear from certain companies, especially if they're anywhere near critical infrastructure stuff, like I'll call it vaccines or medicines, automotive, obviously defense and government. The bar is going to get higher soon. We know that.
Yeah, and I think the tie together with a mandate and cyber is with a mandate, there was always a thought of it won't happen. This will never happen. And I think people see cyber as the same thing. Oh, it won't happen to me. It'll happen to everybody else. But I think with a mandate,
I went to visit a friend at a 3PL he owns not too far from me. We were going to lunch this few months ago. And as I got over there, they do some government work. And I remember as I got to the door, I was like, oh, I have to call. I can never get in the door here. And I noticed the security much higher than it has last year when we had lunch together. And that's higher than the year before. So these are the expectations we should all have. By the way, I will put, if you give it to me, I will put a link to your webinar on the Chinese cranes. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for everybody.
perfect. Thank you.
So one more time, when is this event and who's going to, oh, by the way, I should also mention, I wrote down here, my buddies from Trimble are one of the sponsors, so I'm sure we'll see them down there. Trimble's a top technology company in this space. So enough of my blather. Who's going to be there and why should everyone else who's listening make the trip to Cleveland?
Yeah, so Trimble is our main sponsor, is our premier sponsor, and it is in Cleveland. And the date is October 27th through the 29th. And some of the main speakers, so we have a welcome reception on the 27th. And then on the 28th, we kick it off with the White House. And then we discuss cybersecurity landscape and strategy with Larry Coker or somebody from his office. Then we talk about predictions in the future. And then we talk a lot about the ultimate truck hacking platform that I made mention of. One of the other white papers that we've released this year is securing legacy maintenance software. And so Jamie Lightfoot will present that white paper. We've got somebody from CISA, and we'll talk about API security. We've got a fireside chat about cyber insurance. We've got a call for collaboration where we talk about, hey, what is it you guys want us to focus on? We've got a session on ransomware. And then the next day, we talk about Warner Enterprise kicks it off. So with Dara. And then we do a tabletop.
Wait, what's Dara?
Dara is the Chief Information Officer at Warner. So from a truckload perspective. And then we are doing a business continuity, which you and I had talked about how important that is, tabletop exercise. And then we do a project update on the Seed Key Exchange, which was a webinar that Ben Gardner and I did a few weeks ago. And that, again, is the information, how it gets exchanged to and from the ECU. And then we got a fireside chat. And that is the one with Ward Trucking and also with Todd Florence from Estes. That's one I'll be moderating. And then DAT Freight and Logistics will also be there. And I think that people really want to come because, again, we're really wanting people to hear from their peers in the industry and also from the experts in the industry. We want people to walk away with, these are things that I can implement at my company to make me more secure. And so that's what the tabletop exercises will do also. It's just not something where it's a conference where you really pick up a lot of information and you can implement those in its real world. It's not things like, oh, these are things I can implement in 3 or 4 years. It's things that you can actually go and implement tomorrow and you can think about right away. So that's why we're so excited about it.
And I know it doesn't necessarily address security, but I also understand one of your receptions is at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm looking forward to that.
Now, I am too. I lived in Ohio. I used to go up to Ohio a lot to visit some customers up there. I've never been there.
I have not been either. And by the way, I've been to Cleveland, not in a minute, but I've always enjoyed being in Cleveland. I had some friends there, and I've never been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I'm really looking forward to that aspect of this.
Same here. Yeah, so am I.
And by the way, kids, if you're wondering what are these geezers talking about rock and roll, just Google it. You'll see there's some videos on YouTube about it. Anyway.
Real music.
So I want to wrap this bad boy up. We've covered a lot of ground here. But I'm talking to my friend, Joe Ohr, and we're talking about cyber threats and security in the supply chain, and also about the NMFTA conference, which is coming October 27th, 28th, and 29th in Cleveland, Ohio. We'll put a link to all of this in the show notes. I'll also put a link to Joe's LinkedIn profile, link to NMFTA, and any other links you guys give me. So we've talked about just cybersecurity being a bigger and bigger concern, not only for the economy, not only for the rest of the industry, but obviously it's coming down to us. It's not going to be just somebody else's problem for very long. I think we're going to start hearing from the Fortune 5000 that they want it. So it's not going to be a nice to have anymore. We're going to have to start meeting the standards. And if you want us to meet the standards, you need to work with NMFTA. So we talked about the cargo theft, ransomware, and all of the problems that they cause, but also it's so insidious. All it takes is one bad decision out of thousands of millions of decisions that we make. So anyway, we talked about the threats, and the solution is get involved with NMFTA. They have some of those solutions. They can help you on your journey. And I do think you really have to look at it as a journey. It's not going to be just one day you go, we flip the switch and now we're secure. Anyway, enough of my blather. Joe, final thoughts on the topic.
Appreciate your time, and please come to the conference. We look forward to everybody joining and learning from each other. And NMFTA is going to be out on the road a lot. We will be at IANA Expo, Florida Trucking Association, CSMCP Edge, TCA, Manifest, Cybertruck Challenge. We just came back from DEF CON. We are hitting the road, so we look forward to seeing everyone and appreciate it.
Yep. And if you can't get down to Cleveland, and you really should try and make it, especially if you're in the Midwest, it's only 3 hours for me from Detroit. If you can't get there, you can still engage with NMFTA because, again, they've been doing this for over a decade. This is not new to them. They are people like Joe come from the telematics space. They've been focused on security a lot longer than most of us have even known that it's a threat. Anyway, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.